So can you tell me a little bit about your theological framework for doing this work around violence?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, part of it comes from working with youth in particular. So I always go back to the late Brazilian liberation theologian Rubem Alves, who said that along the lines that children have the capacity to imagine what he calls the possibility of the resurrection. That children and youth are able to imagine the resurrection. That's the world they inhabit, and the world of the adults is the cross. That the violence that's experienced in this world are conditions created by adults. And so when we're thinking about the next generation, the theological framework, I mean, I say this in my book, that no child desires a cross, and no one wants to suffer, and I truly believe that. So it's really coming at it from this place where if you're going to honor that next generation, if you're going to think about youth and young adults as folks who want to flourish, and we want them to experience joy, then there is no theological underpinning that predicates that suffering is necessary. That is the world of violent adults who are creating conditions of domination. And we are offering an alternative, really the theological framework to say, just as Jesus did, look at the child. Just as liberation theologians have said, you have to go to the place where life needs to spring forth. And that's where we're starting. That's our starting place.
Well, you said that beautifully. I would just add that my commitment for many years has been to begin in the life narratives of real people.
Right.
And my work in girlfriend theology was in creating circles, zones of hospitality, where young women could tell their stories. And almost without variance, the stories that they told and tell have to do with the hard places of life, stories they've never told out loud to one another, to another person. We can create spaces where they can tell those stories. And it is the work of mujerista and womanist and Asian feminists who were able to provide a corrective for me, to my white feminist background, which said it's all about moving out of the abstract, moving into the abstract, out of the concrete. And so the image of la lucha and lo cotidiano, which I'm probably murdering the pronunciation of, let me try that again, la lucha and la cotidiano, that Ana Maria Asasedia speaks about, beginning with those places is the space where God is at work. It is the space where we can name the holy. It is the space where we can open ourselves to the ways of becoming more free and more being able to imagine our liberation. And yes, that's relative, but it's a framework that allows for multiple entry points. And what I've experienced, what we still experience in our work when we bring together young people from varying contexts, theologically, racially, and ethnically, they're able to create the kind of common ground for sharing of stories where they not only name the holy, but experience the holy, and out of that experience can move forward to build more spaces that replicate that kind of capacity for joy.
And I would just add that it comes from a starting place of where at least I learned to experience the divine, which was at the hands of my grandmother, who's the most caring and loving person in the world. Saved me from gang violence, saved me from just the violent conditions that were surrounding me, and invited me into her home. And I remember sitting at her rose garden, in her backyard, or at the little altar she had in her house that was built, with the Virgin Mary that we'd pray to and have offerings, the things that were not condoned by the Catholic Church that she passed on, those prayers, the practices that have been in our family for generations, the theology of stories, or theology of the dinner table that we had that she would set, that was always abundant, filled with homemade tortillas and rice and beans, and anyone who wanted to come in had a place at the table. I mean, that is where this theology starts with. It's the theology of the home. It's in the conditions and the stories and the practices that were passed on precisely in those conditions. But that's where the theology of joy comes from for adolescents. It's in my grandmother's hugs, and who's no longer with us, and the kisses, and how she carries on my daughter's carrying on her name and her legacy. So. And
it's so beautiful then to go from the stories of our lives I've always said, let's do Bible study upside down Bible study from the stories of our lives back to Scripture and hear how it's echoed there.
Yeah.
So many of the things you just spoke to, we can just find the direct stories in the life and ministry of Jesus, or in the stories of the Hebrew Bible that we can tie to, so that we can see that this is part of being human, what it's meant to be human for centuries. And it's not all new, and it's not all innovation. It's really just a reimagination of what we've been given as our tradition. Willie Jennings talks about it beautifully in The Christian Imagination, like that slender thread. What is that slender thread that we can go back and reimagine for today, knowing everything that we know about how Christianity got twisted and perverted to be a colonial project? How can we follow that slender thread with care and hope, and in small ways that have ripple effects larger than we can imagine, kind of live our lives by that story as we reimagine it?